Hello, folks, and good morning. Welcome to the early to middle-ish 2023 Dad Device tier list. So for those that have not seen one of these before, I'm doing the format a little bit differently this time anyways. But I like to do a kind of tier list every few months of devices that work really well for that dad role. Those situations where you have kids running around, you have like 40 different things that you're doing at any given time. You got the animals, you got the kiddos, you know, you got this, that, or the other that you got to go deal with, you know, in between side gigs and all that. Essentially, your kind of needs for devices end up changing pretty dramatically to things that can serve multiple roles, to things that you can keep with you at all times, you know, essentially just your needs are substantially different, and in a lot of cases it's going to be stuff that you don't normally consider, like, for example, how difficult it is to repair a original 3DS or anything like that. So, without any further ado, let's get going on this thing, which actually, let's go to the tiers first of all. They should be pretty self-explanatory, but, you know, ideals are going to be the best of the best. Viable are going to be devices that are generally easy enough to repair, generally going to be something that's durable enough to survive, and generally going to be something that you can get on the cheap. Good if you already have it are going to be devices that really will do the job well, again, if you already had one laying around somewhere. But realistically, you probably wouldn't want to go out of your way to acquire. Already on the couch are going to be ones that, you know, are probably already in your house already, but may not have been your primary device. Too expensive are going to be pretty self-explanatory. Child devices are, again, pretty self-explanatory, and then too precious are going to be those situations where an item is just simply worth too much at this point in some other role to potentially get rid of. So, let's go ahead and cover all those from bottom to top. So, too precious, unfortunately at this point, is one of my favorites because I really wish that they would just re-release these things, and that's the old Game Boy SP. These things are incredible devices, but there have been so many mods that came out for them over the years that they have spiked in value. They only have the one screen on there, especially the later gen models of the SP ended up getting butchered in order to make a bunch of different types of mods. These things in their original form are becoming rarer and rarer by the day. Again, whether they're being turned into Game Boy slates, whether they're being reused for adding better screens to stuff, it's just something that's always going to be a little bit of a problem to get a hold of. And you can find them every now and then, but realistically, you're looking at about $100 for a Game Boy. Again, that's been used, that's probably been put through the ringer. Unfortunately, it's definitely in the too precious category at this point. Alright, next up for child devices, I mean, I'm just going to put iPads in here. I know there's a lot of good games on iPads and things like that, but look, when it comes to a dedicated game device, I know that the kids definitely prefer their iPads, especially the older versions and whatever else, more than anything else. Like, at this point, there's just so much stuff on there, though I will say, pay attention to your parental controls. The other day, we had some folks that were visiting. They convinced the kiddos to put on, you know, what looked like a Lego game on there, and the thing is, like, literally every about 30 seconds or so, like, "Here, kids, would you like to learn about gambling?" Like, oh, what the fudge are you trying to... What are you doing? What is the point of this ad? What is this, you know, 4-year-old gonna do with your frickin' sportsbook ad, you know? But yeah, obviously there's a lot of sketchy apps out there. Gotta keep an eye on it, but as far as dedicated kid devices, it's hard to go wrong with an iPad at this point. Again, especially with the older models, they don't really have much of a resale market. I mean, their repairability is basically non-existent unless you've got a warranty on there. So, it is what it is. Put a nice case on it, give it to the kid, there you go. It's their entertainment brick. It is effectively the Game Boy of today, as sad as that may be. Alright, next up in the too expensive category, we're going to have to go with basically the entire line of Odin devices. They're amazing. They're basically the Steam Deck, but smaller. But their price point is just astronomical right now. And actually, for the probably for the same. Actually, no, we're gonna get to the GPD stuff later. But yeah, the Odin devices look incredible. But I will say they're like specifically designed not to be a dad device for all intents and purposes. Again, white coloring that is gonna get scratched up real quick. It's got shiny lights on there, which means the kids are gonna want to grab it. Which essentially also means that well, it's something that you're probably not gonna find a lot of spare parts for. It's something that's probably going to be pretty expensive to fix. They don't look amazingly durable, so I will say probably going in the too expensive / you don't want to risk it category. Wait, Sorry, the weather keeps changing as it does in Michigan. Alright, next up for the already on couch category, the original Switch. We do have the OLED in here, kind of in a different pile, which actually we'll go ahead and put the OLED under, too expensive. But for already on couch, like, I feel like most folks at this point, if they've got kiddos, they've probably been conned into getting a Switch already. They're good devices for what they do. Their battery life isn't insane, but you know, they're good for the kiddos. Like, I know my kids absolutely love playing the old Genesis collection, which cracks me up because the actual remakes of all those old Genesis Sonic games had gone on sale a while ago. And I was like, okay, great, they're gonna finally play, you know, the Infinite Lives version and whatever else. And they hated it. They're like, Dad, this is terrible. I can't put the cartridge, or I can't put the thing into the machine. And they were talking about, like, the Genesis collection has a thing where you, like, pull the game off the shelf and slot it into the Genesis. And, like, all they wanted were their 4 multiplayer levels. They don't care that the remake has more. They're like, no, we want our 4 levels. Oh, it was very adorably wholesome. But anyway, I know the Switch OLED, again, it is a straight improvement on the original in everything but price. I mean, basically every time that I've seen one of those used as a family device, I'm just looking at it like, yeah, that is $500 that is about to get destroyed on the floor. Because for some reason, whenever I see them used as family devices, they're never in a case, and I completely don't understand that. Like, I armored the ever-loving hell out of the one that I gave to my daughter, and she still managed to damage it in multiple cases. How does a child break steel for those little, like, I replaced the little side clips that kept falling off. Basically, the Switch Joy-Cons can get rubbed down when it comes to the little clips that hold them in place, because the default ones are plastic, and they're designed in such a way that if you drop it, it's supposed to, like, bite through the plastic and launch out the Joy-Con to protect the primary unit. At least that seems to be the theory. But you can replace them with aluminum or steel ones in order to kind of give it a bit more robustness so it doesn't, you know, fall out. So it seems like it might be a bit more of a problem. But at any rate, yeah, somehow they managed to break the steel ones. Anyway, yeah, I mean, if they're already on your couch, great, but as far as the OLED model, that thing scares me. Alright, next up for good if you already had one, let's talk about the original 3DS. I feel like these are fairly common. I know a lot of folks personally that, you know, have at least an original model laying around somewhere. They're very pocketable. They're very, very cozy devices. You can do a lot of good emulation with them and stuff like that. Like, personally, I love, you know, playing old Game Boy games and stuff like that on mine. And through modding, which the modding process is a bit difficult, but through modding you can add a bunch of things that it didn't originally have. Like, for example, if, for example, you like a Pokemon Crystal Clear or something like that, you can make it work essentially as it would on original hardware, which is awesome. The kind of inbuilt emulator is kind of an official thing, so it has a tendency to be really accurate, at least so far as I can tell anyway. But unfortunately, this does come with a downside that GBA games will not have a sleep mode, which kind of, I mean, it does turn off the screens at least, and there's technically a way that you can inject a sleep mode through modding, but I personally had never been able to get it to work. So either way, that's, like, if you already had one, these devices are great. It just comes with a caveat that if something does happen to them, and I've been posting this on the Discord lately too, but they are an absolute nightmare to work on. And actually, we're going to put the kind of bigger 3DSs in here. The 2DSs, by the way, again, will also serve this category, though not as a primary data roll. I forgot to put the 2DS on here, apparently. So that's just going to go under child devices, because, I mean, they're basically built like a doorstop, so that the kids can't break them, and I've seen kids understand them very well. They basically see it as like a tablet with buttons. So for kids, definitely. Actually, we're going to go ahead and pretend this is the 2DS, okay? Like, new 3DS, basically an improvement on the original. If you get a small one, great. Unfortunately, the small version of the new 3DS would fall into the too precious category, because again, I don't know why those pictures didn't upload here. because those ones were far less common. They have a tendency to be very expensive. They're like $250, I think, right now for a used model. New 3DSs, or rather the XL models, are typically around the $150 range, but unfortunately these also are just wide enough that they tend to break far more often. Whereas the original kind of 3DS there, just small enough that it's really unlikely that it gets damaged by too much. It's very small, it holds really well in your pocket, the shape is just about perfect for that. Again, personally, mine is special to me because it's like when my wife and I met, we were both playing 3DSs, and it was, it's kind of got that personal attachment. But if I were to go and pick a device in particular, it would not have been picked out of that list because they are ridiculous to repair. To give you an idea, I had a flicker on mine that I had to replace one of the screens for. Basically, I had bought it secondhand, and it had some corrosion that I didn't know about that had been kind of building up over the years on one of the ribbon cables. But anyway, point being, it has one section where, like, I think you can see the mouse. We're like right here, right? Actually, let's see, looking at it, yeah, it should be about right here. You basically, in order to attach the screen, right, you have to disassemble the back plate, you have to take the battery out, you have to, like, remove components here and here, put those aside, you then have to undo a bunch of cables like here, 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 and here. You have to make sure that you remember that the switches all have to later kind of reassemble themselves in the right position, otherwise you're disassembling the whole unit again. At which point you can take this screen out, you can undo the wire that's kind of running through here. Then you get to this screen, at which point you take a heat gun to the top of this screen, you peel this layer off, more screws, again, this is assuming you already took out the motherboard down here and all of that, at which point you have not one, not two, but 3 ribbon cables, as well as the, I think that's like the, no, it's not the camera cable, it is, I forget if it's the Wi-Fi or something, I don't know, there's like just one black cord that runs through all of the unit here. Either way, 3 ribbon cables, which would be enough of a pain in the neck as it is, but they are coiled around 3 separate rings right here that all have to loop through because all of their openings are bigger than those individual loops, and then they all also have to fit into a little, like, slot in between this section here, which is good for the overall longevity of the device, but replacing a screen on these things is a nightmare because, again, all of these have to be done at the same time. You try to put one through, the others can't follow. So they all have to be done at the same time, at an awkward angle, while the 2 magnetic speakers over here are all trying to clamp around it, while the camera cable is running from up here, just like through the entire unit. I ended up ripping out the camera from my 3DS, because screw that. Like, I literally was just like, yeah, no, snip, sorry, you know what, dead camera, you go in the slot just to look pretty, and this cable's getting out of here, I'm not dealing with this. Because it was just way too many cables. I feel so bad for whoever had to assemble these in the first place. There's some friggin' Cthulhu shit in there. No. Alright, next up in terms of viable devices, to stop knocking on the 3DS because I love it as a device. Like, honestly, the library for these devices, it is pretty near and dear to my heart. But yeah, no, like, unique games and other functionality aside, like, internally, hardware-wise, they are a thing of absolute terror. In terms of viable devices, let's go ahead and throw something like the Retroids up here. So, recently these were on sale, which actually originally I had planned to do this tier list while they were on sale, but screw it, chaos happened, sorry. Anyway, 2 Plus and 3 Plus, basically, Retroid's been putting out different versions of more or less the same idea, where it's a phone made into a handheld. Now, let me just say that they're firmly in the viable but not ideal pile, simply because they are a bit complicated to set up. They do have parts, they do have parts available from the shop itself. Occasionally they'll have issues replenishing that stock, so that might be an issue down the line. I've had the 2 Plus before, I've researched the 3 Plus. The 3 is basically just the 2 Plus but wide. So either way, they're solid devices, they'll do the job. I feel like the buttons are a little bit too loud to the point where it might piss off your significant other, just kind of FYI. But if you are looking to just kind of get started on this pile, they're basically available, new, and cheap. Comparatively cheap anyway. They're about 100 to 150. For comparison's sake, that original 3DS over here is about 100. Those Odin devices are like 8 to 1400. But either way, as far as entry-level devices, these are great. They're going to run everything up to, allegedly, PS2. It's questionable. Because they're, like, a lot of times folks see the PS2 and GameCube thing on here and get way too excited about that. Like, GameCube and stuff, like, for example, you can run RE4 with a bunch of speed hacks on there, and it'll sort of run. And then you basically just downscale everything so that it looks like soup. And so it technically runs. It's not terrible, but just so you know, temper your expectations with these two. Like MGS2 or 3, yeah, that ain't gonna happen. GTA San Andreas ain't gonna happen. Something simple like MDK Armageddon totally will. You want to run some Armored Core? Yeah, that's a fat chance. Basically, anything that's even remotely difficult, they choke and die. But anything that's that's on the easy end of those, they can pretty much handle. Try to play some Smash, not going to happen too well. Some RE4 surprisingly works decently. I know that for the PS2 side of things, actually one thing that was a little bit confusing to me is that Resident Evil Outbreak has a tendency to not play well on a lot of situations. But I think most of the time that I had my 2+, I was playing Outbreak 2 on it, so I'm not sure why it handled that one in particular well, but whatever. One downside is, since these are Android-based, this does mean you have to use the Android versions of those things. Whether that's a good or bad thing depends on the app. For example, recently, that PS2 one in particular has had some drama because the guy behind the Aether SX2 app turned out to... apparently it's been boiling beneath the surface for a while that the guy's kind of a dick. So recently, I guess they got all spiteful and started, like, ruining the app for the purpose of getting back at people. I don't know what that's all about, but either way, it's kind of what's kept me from considering replacing my Pocket device with one of these again. Like, recently, I ended up having to sell my favorite one of this list in order to get another thing on this list for practical purposes, but we'll get to that in a moment. Alright, next up for Ideal Dad Devices, this is going to come as no shock whatsoever. It has been the long frontrunner. It has been the absolute just champion of all of these devices by miles and miles, and that is the PS Vita. Specifically the Slim model for this particular thing, though I will say the 1000 is certainly viable as well. Hardware-wise, these are the same. The only reason I make the distinction between the two is that when it comes to the 2000, like, when it comes to a dad device, you want something that can reasonably be dropped, and you can technically drop both of them, and to some degree, we could make the argument that the 1000 is going to be more durable. It's got a bit sturdier construction, technically speaking. Its edges are a bit more reinforced, but what I will say is that when it comes to the 2000, typically they're easier to find parts for. The charging cable is a micro USB as opposed to the proprietary one that the 1000 uses. And additionally, the cases for this one all come with that same slimness that this one has. So, like, personally, a small carrying bag with a silicone case is how I've always kept mine. They're insanely durable devices. Like, I've seen them completely beat to shit and still function. Like, recently, the prices on these things will vary quite a bit. To actually address that real quick, because these all do tie in together, but, like, typically you're looking at about 80 to 120 for one of these. And as to why we'd consider them over something newer, well, just a sec. But anyway, as far as the slim profile on these things, yeah, the Slim is definitely probably the most pocketable device on this list by far. Its shape is perfect for a pair of shorts, jeans, what have you. Its overall back shape is perfect for just going and just deflecting stuff off. I've regularly gone and done manual work and stuff like that with one of these in my pocket. I've regularly had it swinging around my vest. Again, silicone case on there, something to cover up that silicone case. You're solid. That thing is near indestructible. I've had them take direct hits from stuff and have no damage whatsoever. If you have analog stick drift on the 2000, you can just usually take some isopropyl and a Q-tip to the edges of the downside of the stick. Usually it'll do the job. Repairability-wise, they're not the most convenient thing in the world, but I have repaired some before, and it's certainly doable. Definitely a lot easier to handle than something like the 3DS, that's for sure. Again, parts are going to be harder to find on these, but they are very robustly built. And their prices have a tendency to vary. Like recently I ended up finding a replacement for the one that I sold for $60, but at the same time they're one of the only devices on this list that may actually profit you to use it because of that interesting variability in its price. So for example, there was a price spike a little while ago when my laptop had died, and I was able to sell my existing one for about $200. One time previously it had spiked up to the point where somebody had bought it for $300. And then I would just simply wait for them to become cheap again, pick up another one, pick up a new SD to Vita mod, and there we go. We're just right back into making the same thing. They're very quick to mod at this point. You can do them from the device themselves. Literally all you need is an SD to Vita, which is like $6 on Amazon. You get any micro SD card, you pop it in there, you pop it in the unit in the game slot, and there you go. Don't deal with the original memory cards. Those things are hot trash. Some folks have said that they managed to hold up, but no. Anyway, the 2000 model has essentially has no need for those memory cards whatsoever. The 1000 technically has that space available on the unit, but you do have to do some finagling in order to get access to it. The 2000, again, you can just mod out of the gate. It's just logistically speaking, the 2000 has a lot more going for it, though the 1000, again, on hardware level is basically going to be the same. And that space that I'm talking about is about 1 gig of free space that the 2000 model has. That again is hidden on the 1000. The reason why this matters is because just out of the gate, without needing a memory card, you can go ahead and just mod these as they are. Now that said, the reason that I recommend them above these ones, despite being newer, is the fact that they can do a lot of the things that the Retroids can't. So for example, with the Retroid, like I said, you can't run MGS2 or 3 on there. The ports for the Vita are, I would say, probably the best versions out there. And just like for pretty much everything. Recently I've been going and playing some original MGS2 on the Steam Deck, and it was like, yeah, you know, it's actually surprising how much better the actual newer ports for those were. If, for example, you're looking for something like San Andreas, again, can't play those on the Retroid outside of the regular mobile version, but the Vita has a very dedicated homebrew scene, which has actually gone and updated that mobile version into basically the PS2 version with some improvements. So either way, that version is far better than the original mobile version. It's not even funny. And same can be said for a lot of stuff that just doesn't normally get ports. The one thing, like hell, I was surprised to see that I could play Fallout 2 comfortably on a Vita. Like, what the hell is that, you know? One thing I will say that the Retroid does have over the Vita is being able to run the Morrowind port. That's about it. For practically everything else, like emulation-wise, it's a very close edge case between the two, but like, for example, you're probably going to get better stuff like Dreamcast and whatever else for the Retroid, but at the same time, you basically have all of the same stuff, more or less, going up to N64 on the Vita. The PS1 emulation is top-notch. It's official. Basically, PS1, PS2, anything PlayStation-related, the Vita is just going to handle better. In terms of the streaming capabilities on both, again, the Retroid, it felt like a novelty. On the Vita, it felt like, hey, wow, I can actually play some Bloodborne on the toilet. So either way, your mileage may vary, but personally, I think just the fact that these are a little bit less cost-wise, they feel a lot more robust in terms of their build. You're going to have a far easier time getting a hold of parts. They can do equal to or better in most categories. Not to mention, actually, one thing I haven't mentioned is that the Vita's got some of the most insane battery life I've ever seen in a handheld. Like, I play a lot of PSP games, and so, for example, in my case, I was able to stretch out about 11 hours at one point, whereas for the Retroid, it was typically about 3-4 hours. But either way, obviously, different units will vary in terms of what kind of batteries they got. But I'm just saying, you can get some absolutely insane battery life out of the Vita. It really lives up to its name. It is the life device, after all. Alright, so before we continue establishing the Vita cult, let's continue moving on here. So next up, in terms of ideal devices, I'm actually going to put one pocket emulator on here, or dedicated pocket emulator, and that is going to be the 280V. These things, and personally, I haven't owned a 280V, but I've regularly seen these constantly come up and praised for their durability. They're harder to get a hold of at this point, but in terms of these ones, specifically because there were new ones that were supposed to replace it, like the Mii Mini and whatever else, that started running into build quality issues, but these ones seem to have stood the test of time, so either way, they seem to comfortably deserve their role there. Though I will say, as far as other Anbernic devices, they're typically like the Retroid there in terms of being relatively cheap, in terms of having cool designs for them. Anbernic releases so many devices that I don't even want to get into their specifics. This is why I'm specifically putting, I think this was the 351, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was the 351V. I don't know, they put out so many devices I can't keep, like, other than the XX being the cheap Game Boy looking thing, I cannot keep their designs straight. Basically, whatever layout of buttons and screens you prefer, they'll have something for it. It's just that they seem to put out a new device every 5 minutes, and I can't possibly tell what the hell they're going on about, so either way, that'll be that. Okay. Let us continue here. Okay, next up, in terms of being too precious, unfortunately, again, original Game Boy, like, these things are getting modded to absolute ridiculousness. So yeah, you'd basically be looking for $100 or so just for the purpose of getting yourself just Game Boy Color. It just doesn't seem worth it in my book. So either way, and again, actually for a comparison, Anbernic typically you're looking like 60 to 150 depending on what device you're looking at. Okay, next up for laptops. This is gonna vary, alright? So I'm gonna put it in the already on couch category. I know you don't keep your laptop on your couch, but I just mean, like, if you already have a laptop around the house, it'll do the job, but it won't be your, like, primary device. Like, it's one of these cases where it'll be good as a backup in its own room somewhere, but it's not something that you're reasonably going to carry with you. And actually, in many cases, for the more expensive ones, we can put them in the too precious category. But I'm going to put already on couch, because in most cases, folks already will have one of these laying around. Usually, you don't use them for games much, so we're just going to drop them down there. Okay, too precious category, we're going to go ahead and drop the old analog pocket. Actually, that's going to go in the too expensive category. GBC, GBA, and some Game Gear and stuff like that, but it's about $200 for it's got a very nice screen and some very expensive peripherals, so we're just going to put that out over there. Next up, kind of Android tablets. If it's already on the couch, great. I know I've had some cheap tablets that I've turned into emulator devices before. Not going to be a great primary device, but you know, they're there as a fun backup. Child devices, Switch lights, there's really none of these that will not get you some funny looks if you try to carry around as a dad. Alright, next up, as far as ideal child devices, actually can go to the top end of child devices, and that is going to be the GB macro. So these are actually a custom mod, not really something that you go out and find officially. But the GB Macro is essentially a Nintendo DS Lite, or DS of any description, that has had its top end ripped off. It's had a couple little capacitor thingies kind of soldered in there, and then it was closed back up. So basically this turns it into a Game Boy. It just turns it into a regular old GBA. They have the GBA slot on there. And it allows you to custom make a modern Game Boy, and they're pretty freaking awesome. It's a way to save an old device that realistically probably can't be fixed because the hinges on these things were truly something else. Though I will say, if you happen to have a DS that it was just the hinge, try folding in a pen cap and just super gluing it in place. I've had that succeed before. It can work. Just, you know, it's not 100% to work, but it might be something that might save it. But either way, these are great. They basically just function like an original GBA. I say this is a child device because realistically you want something with a sleep mode when you're carrying them around. So either way, good for the kids. Not so much a primary, you know, like play for 5 minutes in between loads and laundry kind of device. Which actually, again, I should probably mention, going back up to these other devices right here. One of the issues with some of these pocket emulators is that they can sometimes have a bit of a hang when you go and take them in and out of sleep mode. Again, just something that you don't really see out of the Vita or the Vita very much. It almost never happens. And in fact, right next to the Vita, we're going to go ahead and put the old reliable PSP 3000. Basically can do a lot of the same stuff, has a lot of the same features, is also insanely robust and built for defense. Also incredibly easy to find parts for, incredibly easy to find cheap. You can typically find these anywhere from, like, I would say $30 to $50 in decent enough shape. In many cases, they're going to be coming from pawn stores that simply have no way to test them. In a lot of cases, all they need is like a $20 battery or something like that, and in some cases, it's literally just a battery cover. Just if you are replacing the batteries, look for ones that actually have some rating to them. These will vary quite a bit. But the PSP subreddit has a active a list at all times of just newer battery types and kind of how they fare at this point. You can also get some pretty decent battery life out of this. Personally, one thing that I really liked for these was going with a Cameron Encino makes an 1800 battery with a custom back cover on there. So like if you buy one that's missing the back battery cover, you can just get one of those 1800 ones. It kind of gives it the same feel of like a Game Boy Color or something like that in your pocket because it sticks out a bit. But though you can easily get like 7-8 hours of battery life on that. It's pretty cozy. All right, and we'll actually put the 1000 on the top end of viable only because while it does a lot of the same stuff that the 3000 does, it's just a bit more chunky. Whereas the 3000 is light enough that you can drop it at almost any angle and it'll be just fine. Sorry, my nose is starting to act up. The 1000 is a bit heavier and a bit less defensively built. Like, the 3000 in particular is built in a very interesting way that if you've ever felt the kind of spongy buttons on there, that seems to be a defensive feature, because if you drop it, even if you drop it straight on the screen onto concrete, those buttons will pad the hit. And I've seen, like, even the expanded battery model taking a face-first hit onto concrete from about 2 feet up, and it's still managed to get away from that situation without a scratch. They're very impressively built in terms of just not taking damage, so it's pretty handy there. Okay, next up for child devices, DS clamshell, and basically of the old Game Boy line of devices, I feel like the DS clamshell is the only one that's actually like cheap and repairable enough to actually still serve as a kind of modern original Game Boy, as it were. Because these things were, they were extremely unsexy. Nobody kept one of these around for its aesthetics, but it still had that original screen that ended up looking really good in the sunlight. Which basically means that if you're driving, like, for example, like one of my kiddos has like a 15-minute drive to school, right? And when they're driving in the sunlight, like, my daughter's tried using the Switch in the car and hates using it in the car, because the glare, even with an anti-glare coating on the device, will regularly be a problem. Whereas, for example, the DS clamshell did not have that problem. And conveniently, the DS library it has a decent number of games that ended up later becoming something for the Switch. So, for example, if your kiddos like their Animal Crossing, they might like the DS Animal Crossing, stuff like that. Either way, very robust devices. They have that screen that's good in the sunlight. It's a real shame that that's not coming back as a feature, because it's a very regular problem in a lot of newer devices. Smaller screens that can get more intense lighting, like for example something like the Vita or some of these pocket emulators, will be able to function pretty well, but many of the devices on this list you simply cannot see in direct sunlight without completely roasting battery. And I'm looking at you in particular, Switch, because you've got the bigger screen. Like, you just start seeing that battery life completely disappear before your eyes if you turn it bright enough to be able to see in the sunlight. And, yeah, well, it is what it is. Alright, next up here, PSP Go, unfortunately going in the too precious category at this point. These have a tendency to come and go in terms of their price. Like last year when the circus broke out across the sea, I was able to pick one up for pretty cheap, because unlike the other PSP devices on here, you don't, like for the PSP, the Vita, all of that, you simply buy an adapter for a couple bucks, stick a micro SD card in there, and you're good to go. Like, you've just gotten about like 800 times the original memory that the original could hold. You could put the entire PSP library on one micro SD card, and it would still probably have plenty of space left. The PSP Go, however, requires a different mod, and basically requires disassembling the device, which meant that last year when that circus broke out, since the main source of those is a guy in Ukraine, their price ended up plummeting for a few weeks, which is the only reason I was able to actually try one out for a bit. They're great devices. The edges are a little bit iffy in terms of being cozy. The screen kind of moves in and out a little bit of the unit there. So you want a case on there. They're very, very pocketable, but I almost feel like they're too pocketable, where they're far more likely to fall out than something like the other PSP devices. And again, especially the Vita. Like, the Vita is that perfect size and shape to stay in your pocket and feel comfortable in your pocket without falling out. Like, you can run around with that thing in there and nothing will happen to it. The PSP, a little bit less so. Sometimes they'll slide out because they got that, like, glossiness to them, but you don't necessarily want to give them a rubberized case, because then it'll get snagged on your pocket and you'll just, like, accidentally jolt it on the floor. Which, like, the PSP, Vita, whatever else, they can function perfectly fine without a case. The Go, I feel like it definitely would want a case with it. Still, though, fantastic devices. Their screen, while smaller, is incredible. So if you already have one, great. If you can get a hold of one for like 60, 70 bucks, beautiful. Realistically, though, you're looking at like 150 to 200 at least right now. So that's a bit of a bummer. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the next viable, which this one can vary. I'm going to put it in ideal dad device for the moment, because this is going to vary quite a bit. It's going to be very situational, so it's going to be on the bottom end of ideal here, and that's going to be the Steam Deck. Like, I will say, after having it for a little while now, it is perfect as a kind of dad-centric laptop replacement, where, like, you want to be able to play your PC stuff, but you still need a PC every now and then, like, you use it for side gigs or whatever else. If you're not in a professional setting where, like, you just need your occasional computational stuff, you're doing back-end stuff, it'll be great as something that converts into a PC when needed and can do games when needed. It's definitely the fastest PC I've ever owned, and it's a very, very handy device. It feels amazing to hold. Like, you just hold this thing in your hands, like, this feels like power. But yeah, great devices, great support from the community and the developers and stuff like that. The double mouse pad thing feels really good. Like, right now, I just use it like a regular mouse pad like this. And they're wonderful devices for the price. Again, for the price point, it hurts a little bit because it's like 400, 600, 800, right? I would personally recommend only the 400 model, because the other stuff is stuff that you can upgrade into if you need to. But as a laptop replacement, it's an incredible value, because basically Chromebooks and stuff like that, just your very low-end processing-wise, will typically be up to about the 300, 350 range, give or take. These days, especially after 2020, a lot of those old, kind of more processing-centric computers, even like middle-of-the-line stuff, you're still looking at like 500, 600. I mean, there's occasional exceptions, and in a lot of cases, they're going to end up looking somewhat sketchy. But I will say, if you're in the market for a laptop replacement, and then you also want a device to go with it, Steam Deck is amazing for that particular role. Again, I replaced my laptop with it, and when it comes to like video editing, when it comes to doing more kind of visually orientated stuff, it is fantastic for that. Now, just bear in mind, you definitely want to invest in a big micro SD card, which yeah, they're great for that. Wonderful devices. They actually are a lot lighter than you'd think to hold. And at the end of the day, they are extremely cozy as a just like laying in bed playing something device. Though I will say they do lose out on the mobility department. Like the Vita, you can shove into your pocket, like play for a couple minutes, quickly like stash it away. It's got that like quick draw potential to it. Same thing for the PSP and many of the other viable devices on this list. The Steam Deck does not. It is more of a table and moving around the house kind of device. You definitely don't want to drop them. They're definitely not built to take a drop, though I will say they can probably take some dings here and there. Again, they are built to be repairable, so there's that. They're probably one of the least likely to be dropped of anything on this list, I will say that much. Just the overall design of how you hold this thing is very particular. It's very unique. So I will say, yeah, great end-of-the-day device, great, like, a computer replacement device. Again, I was able to replace everything on my desk with one of these. But yeah, just bear in mind that it does not have the mobility of many of the other devices on this list. So just kind of bear that in mind. It's definitely not something that you can quickly stash in your pocket. It's something that you'd want to pop back into its case. And you will occasionally have the usual PC quirks, like, you know, if you're trying to turn it on and off sleep mode repeatedly, you're probably going to have a bit of lag when you do that 2-3 times in a row. You know, at least for a few seconds. It's a minor thing, but, you know, it's one of those you kind of wish it wouldn't happen kind of moments. Alright, either way, fantastic device, great value, especially as a laptop replacement. As a standalone just game device, if you're really heavily invested into Steam, yeah, but then you probably already were looking at it. But if you are just looking for a pocket device, it doesn't do that role particularly well, slash at all. Though I have seen some really awkward looking solutions of like freaking like bandoliers that you can put it into. I have seen those magnetic shell cases that seem to make it a bit more maneuverable, but it doesn't seem to really make it a pocket device. So if this thing was like 10% smaller, it's so close. But either way, I feel like it's basically on par maneuverability-wise as the Switch, where it's that same thing of you're really not keeping it in your pocket, if we're being honest. But okay, let's just cover what's left on this list here. So, as far as too expensive, something like the Backbone. Now, this isn't necessarily as expensive as many other things on this list, but it is expensive in terms of, I don't know, probably taking a huge amount of emotional weight to process that we didn't get a Vita 2 or a PSP 3 in favor of this stupid iPhone thing. So, either way, that just weighs heavily on my soul, and that is just a bit too expensive. Next up, in terms of just slapping some controllers to your device, I mean, if you already got them, go for it, but this is one of those things where if you are going to, like, family game nights, if you are just bringing your stuff along, realistically, don't expect folks to believe that you brought your, attachable controller on accident. That's another one of those things that's very kind of handy about a lot of things on this list. Something like, for example, the 280V is small enough that people will believe you just always have that on you. Something like the PSPs, same thing. The RP2 Plus, absolutely. Something like the Vita or the 3 Plus, or other Vita, or some of these Ambernick devices. In many cases, they get mistaken for a phone, and that's a good thing, because in a lot of cases, you essentially just want to look like you're on your phone. Everyone's always on their phone. And if you want something with a bit more, power behind it, if you want something that's more of a dedicated game device, I mean, you really don't want to be getting asked questions every few seconds as far as, hey, what is that thing you have? Explain your thing. I don't have any other topic of conversation, so let's talk about that thing you brought. And instead, it's just like, oh, yeah, they're just on their phone, whatever. So either way, that kind of stuff is pretty handy, at least in my book. I think it's a pretty solid feature. And yeah, so there is that. But again, as far as whipping out two chunky controllers and slapping them on your phone, that's probably not going to happen. Which actually, was that this thing? It might have been this thing. I don't know. One of these is a streaming. Okay, this is going to be the streaming device, I think. As far as streaming devices, I'm gonna go ahead and say it's going in the couch category. Like, look, realistically speaking, when it comes to streaming stuff, that's not, like, it has startup time, okay? And many of the other devices on this list can already do that. Like, for example, PS Vita's got Moonlight as one of the homebrew things. The Retroids can do Steam Link. Actually, even the PSP has a thing where you can actually connect it via Wi-Fi to your PC. It's not exactly the greatest thing in the world, but it's got some interesting applications. Either way, as far as a dedicated streaming device, if you're like really heavily into all that stream stuff, sure, but you're not going to play it on a long car ride, if we're honest. You're not going to just randomly show up to somebody's house and have all your stuff work right away. If you put it into sleep mode, you're not going to instantly start back up wherever you were. You're probably going to have connection issues. It's a couch device as far as I'm concerned. So we'll go ahead and put that over there. The GPD series, again, kind of like the Odin stuff, but a bit cheaper, where it's the same idea as the Steam Deck of a pocket PC, though these are definitely way more pocketable. And unfortunately, if it wasn't for the fact that it's seemingly very difficult to actually get any way to repair these, they would be far higher on this list, because they're actually competitive, like, depending on which one you're looking at, they are relatively competitive price-wise between the Steam Deck and some of the GPD devices, especially the older ones when buying secondhand. But yeah, they do seem to have a repairability issue, and also they've got that pocketability, but it's like they're still fairly large, so it's like technically pocketable, but it feels like it'd be kind of clunky to use. They look great though. Personally, I wish that these were a bit more affordable, because that is what I looked at first before the Steam Deck. It's just the value that you get for the deck is absolutely ridiculous. Next up, for just basic phones, I mean, everyone's already got a phone. It'll do the job if you got it, but it is what it is. You usually don't want to burn through your battery. You don't want to go and waste all your battery life just for the purpose of going and playing some games while you're out and about. You don't want to end up accidentally screwing yourself in that situation, because it can feel really bad to wind up in that situation where your battery's drained, you can't deal with some problem in your day because you tried to run an N64 emulator on the thing and it decided to become 150 degrees. And yes, I am even talking about newer phones that love to do that, because just sometimes they'll really freak out and completely roast. It's a really frustrating thing. I wish that they got a bit better at it, but it is what it is. I have yet to see despite having a fairly newer device at this point, just out of convenience, I've yet to see a game that didn't roast that thing. So it's a bit of a bummer. Again, to go over some of these things up here, Steam Deck runs pretty hot, but its battery life is actually not as bad as people say it is. If you're playing it responsibly, you can still see like 5-6 hours of battery life. And actually, in terms of staying power behind a lot of these devices, just to point this out, like the Vita, I had cases where I'd left it for like 2 weeks without touching the thing. It still had like 95% battery when I got back. PSP, same thing, although it was like 70, 80-ish. But again, these batteries are getting older. That was with an original launch battery still for that one. 280V I can't speak to. Retroid did not hold up too well in that particular regard. It did seem to drain about as much as a phone normally would, even on airplane mode for whatever friggin' reason. Original PSP and Vita, same as their above counterparts. 3DS kind of holds up pretty well in this regard, though I will say the Switch, I've seen them drop to like 67%, 60 to 70%, just kind of sitting there, like within a day. Their drain is pretty disgusting. I'm not sure why. Again, even on airplane mode, I've seen them drain out pretty, unfortunately, fast. Sometimes it stays, oftentimes it doesn't. Just everything about the Switch just kind of feels like a weird problem. I don't know. Again, allegedly the OLED ended up fixing a lot of that problem, and the V2 Switches did end up improving on a lot of those things. I don't know. The Switch just feels like a weird middle ground behind a lot of things for me, but it's not going to be a dedicated dad device. You might be able to reshell a Lite, and it might function in a similar role to something like the Vita, but it's still going to be pretty noticeable. But either way, hopefully this list helped out some folks. Hopefully this was useful information. And yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of a lot of these devices on this list. And obviously, up to this point, I should mention that it was kind of expected that you'd probably have a budget of about $100 for a lot of these things. So, if there was something that simply wasn't worth the value, then that's why it got rated a little bit differently. Like, for example, again, something like the Steam Deck is a bit of an interesting exception in terms of just being able to basically run everything up to PS3 stuff. They do take some more tinkering, but they're robust and kind of mature looking enough that realistically nobody's going to pick it up and be like, here, it is a video games for the children's, and then just like give them a super expensive device and they end up destroying the thing. Looking at you, basically anything Switch related. But yeah, like something like the Vita, it typically doesn't shine as much. Well, it doesn't shine as much in terms of looking appealing to the kiddos. It looks more complicated. Though I will say I've regularly just gone and given the kids and even smaller kids the Vita or various PSP units, because it's kind of a running joke that I always have at least a couple devices on me. And I've regularly handed those to the kids, and they just haven't been able to do anything to them. And actually, as a bit of a further experiment, recently I found a Vita that I saw listed up on eBay for $60. And I figured, you know what, this thing looks absolutely just annihilated. Like, the screen was destroyed, the buttons were destroyed. Like, I want to see how this holds up. But either way, you can find them for pretty darn cheap, especially compared with a lot of other stuff on this list. Like, the performance to price to durability that you get on the Vita is just absolutely top-notch. You cannot touch that with anything else on this list. It's not even close. It could have been its own tier, and it probably still wouldn't touch it. Probably the closest thing is something like the RP3 Plus, which does have a lot of the kind of Steam issues. Not Steam issues, just Android issues. Steam Deck, again, is an incredibly capable device. It just doesn't have the mobility to be anything other than a laptop replacement for this particular example. And this is coming as somebody who absolutely loves their Steam Deck at this point. It just was a practical laptop replacement in my case. So, either way, I know that there were definitely some things that I missed, different versions of the GPD models, different flavors of those GB macros and stuff like that, which, by the way, if you want to make a GB macro out of an original clamshell, it also does that job great. Personally, I just prefer it to have the cover on the device. Kind of feels like a bit of an extra way to lose the protection on your device, but whatever. As far as other laptop variants, like, tablet variants and whatever else, I didn't even consider those because those are terrifyingly expensive in most cases. That laptop in particular up there was a Chromebook made into a tablet. Again, it just feels like looking at that thing, like the hinges are going to break, the buttons are going to break, that thing's going to get dropped and annihilated. Like, that thing is not going to have a long life. Because, again, you have to expect, kiddos are going to want to run up and grab things and or be like, oh, hey, look, they sat down, let me be helpful, and then they, attempt to bring you something, and they're like, here you go, you're welcome, and then they trip on something and, launch it straight into the floor. These things happen. I mean, it's not with bad intentions or whatever else. These things just happen. It's what kids do. Just regular chaos is what you can expect. Or, for example, you're running around the store and some psychopath runs into you with a shopping cart, and I've literally had that with a PSP where the shopping cart just went and bashed it straight on the screen for the 3000 model, and it was about a $20 repair, and it was all good to go. Even for ones that are thoroughly destroyed, you can just take out the chip and put it in a new one, and you're good to go. That's going to be the problem with some of these Android devices in particular, because you may not always have all of your stuff saved in one place. When it comes to relying on something like Retroid, it may not always have all your saves backed up in the same way, and in many cases there might be a lot more things to set up. This is why, again, I particularly like stuff like the PSP and the Vita, because all the saves are just in one place, in one list. For all of the standalone stuff, it's all just in the same folder. It's in a format that will be read by anything that can run those devices. You can back them up easily, you can move them around easily. They're just very, very convenient for that kind of stuff. It's just kind of plug and play. Again, this is why I've been able to replace my Vita multiple times. That it's just like back up to the computer, sell the unit for too much, buy it for too little, put it onto the new one, Vita is dead, long live the Vita. But anyway, this is kind of how it goes. Something like the Switch and the 3DS can be kind of frustrating in that regard, because backing up your saves can be more of a problem. If you mod them, great, but if you have a Switch that is completely destroyed, if you can't even connect it to the dock anymore, then realistically those saves are just gone. You can't really transfer them over because they are all saved on the device itself, not the external memory card, which there's no option to do because they thought people were going to cheat using that. And basically losing out on that peace of mind for the purpose of somebody's frickin' anti-cheat on Mario Kart is not my idea of a good time. So either way, again, to each their own. It's just, personally, I prefer to have a very easily accessible, the device has just been frickin' shotgunned, but I can still put the save somewhere kind of device. So, that'll be up to you. I know when it came to something like the Retroid, when I was moving stuff off of the Retroid, it wasn't always compatible with whatever I was trying to move it into. So that's always been a bit of a thing to set up. When it came to using old PS2 memory card saves, I backed it up off my original PS2 and stuff like that. It was way more of a pain in the neck to set up than just using modern ports, again, Vita versions and stuff like that. I will say the Steam Deck probably wins in this regard on almost all fronts, though, because it's basically just got, cloud backups for frickin' everything. So I literally have saves from multiple devices ago that I didn't even know that I had. As soon as I went and booted up the Steam Deck, they're like, here you go, hundreds of saves, you're welcome. Just, finger of Gabe or God. Just down to here you go, you have been blessed with all of your saves ever. So, either way, just, more stuff to consider. Alright, anyway, I am out of time for today. I gotta get going. So, hopefully this was helpful, and y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care.